welcome to everyone. Look, my mother died on Thursday, and I know, like everybody's, it was certainly shocking to me and Debbie and my brother Doug. And I know the news comes somewhat as a surprise to some people in the room, and on the screen, I had a call with Tennessee maybe 30 minutes after I got the news, maybe it's an hour or so. And I apologized to her this morning because I didn't even tell her. We had other things to cover, and it was just so soon that I just was like, I wasn't ready to say, oh, and my mom died. What did you want to talk about? Um, these things are funny, and it's a bit dangerous, I think, to be giving a Dharma talk and purporting to, presenting any attempt at wisdom in a moment like this when, here we are, life and death are of supreme importance, and it just happened, and it just happened. And I'm right in the middle of that. And I considered, well, I had a koan plan that I was going to cover, and I could just do the koan, and all the koans are related to life and death and suffering and into suffering in some ways. So, I mean, it wouldn't be a complete cop out to do that, but it also felt like it would be a missed opportunity to just be real with all of you and to explore some of this just in real time, live. Um, I was in one of Lori's gardens, actually, the garden that she had designed in San Juan Capistrano, helping with some irrigation issues. I think I'm the new irrigation guy, but helping sort some irrigation issues, and I had just looked at my phone and I saw a string of texts from my sister Debbie and my brother, and I was like, uh-oh, something's up. And I turned around to say to Lori, something's up. And she had her phone in her hand because Debbie had reached Lori. And Lori just looked at me and said, your mom died, and handed me the phone. And Lori and my mother were very close through many years. The path with my mother was a long one. She was 82 years old. There were many moments when we thought she was going to die. A moment not too long in the past, right, Debbie, where you and Doug and I actually discussed, the do not resuscitate and how things would go because we thought that was imminent. But my mother is a really stubborn cuss, a really ornery person. And Lori and I were talking about this last night because, I mean, one way to look at the later years of her life, and I was going to be really honest with everybody, one way of looking at the later years of her life is that she wanted to die. My father died was 4 years ago, and that was very, very, very hard on my mother. And we discovered at that point in time how much he had taken care of her that we did not know. 4 years, Debbie, or five? 5 years. Yeah, as four came out, it felt like the wrong number. 5 years. And one way to look at it is that she wanted to die, that she was done with this. And she expressed that at different times. And she made a couple of attempts on her own life in that time frame and was not successful. And so in some ways, and I don't know if this is true for Debbie and Doug, but for me, in some ways, there was some practice there around saying goodbye. Some practice around letting go. And in the final couple of months of her life just recently, she also cut off communication with us. And no matter who tried to call, she did not pick up the call, even our son Nick. So who knows what that's about? Like I said, she's quite the character, and had some different diagnoses of mental illness, bipolar, and things like that going on, and she was physically a wreck. She had spine work and fused this and fused that. And when I was a teenager, she had her spleen removed and spent 2 months at Little Company of Mary's Hospital here in Los Angeles. And so has been immunocompromised ever since I was a teenager. She contracted COVID earlier this year in the nursing home in Atlanta. And, against everything we know about COVID and all odds, it should have taken her out, and it did not. She pulled through that. So I was saying to Lori in the middle of the night last night, another way of looking at my mom's final years is that her will to live was stronger than her body. It was stronger than her various mental states. Because she outlasted it all. And when she died on Thursday, at least as it's been explained to us so far, she was in the hallway. She was having trouble breathing. They got her back to her room. They called the paramedics. Her heart stopped. She had to do not resuscitate, and that was it. So against this backdrop of all of these years of this and that and all of our concern, a relatively clean exit. Relatively clean. Now, none of us were there and none of us had been talking to her, so it's somewhat of a mystery, in terms of what state she was in. What she was thinking about us, if she was thinking about us, any of that is like, boom. And there's a lot of shallow Buddhist platitudes I could throw out there. Impermanence, everything changes, everything arises, everything falls. And just human platitudes of we're all dying. We're all going to die. And yet there's that finality of, it's like she's gone. She's gone. Last week I talked on the koan about, requiting filial piety. And we were talking about, the exact words of the koan, when mourning clothes are no longer worn, what then? Right? What then? And the response to that is, today I have requited my filial piety. Today I have honored my duty as a son or a daughter to my parents, to my teachers, to those who have come before me. And then the question is, when you've requited the filial piety, what then? And the teacher says, I'd love to get stumbling drunk. And the only better timing of doing that talk would have been if it had happened Thursday morning, and so, I was thinking about that, and, we already talked that koan in inside and outside, but, how do we honor our parents? How do I honor my mother and my father before? And part of it is just this. Part of it is just this. Here we are all together. Put on the clothes, put on the robes. And I'm not talking about out of some sense of duty or out of some sense of soldiering through, but this is what there is to do. This is what's before me right now. And how do I honor my mother? With the same kind of will that she had? You know? My mother, some of you met her. She came to my Tokado or novice priest ordination. I think she may have come to Jakai as well. I don't remember. This practice, and Debbie, I think you could verify this, but my mother really validated this practice that I entered into 20 years ago. And it was not her practice. She's not a Buddhist. She's Irish Italian Catholic, and then Presbyterian and various versions of this and that. But she at one point thanked me for sitting Zazen. She thanked me for taking this practice on because she credited it in part to bringing our family back together. In part. I mean, I can't take any credit for that, but she credited the practice and the work with being part of what bridged the gaps in our family, because there was a time when our family had some pretty big chasms of understanding, chasms of belief, chasms of experience. My brother and I in particular, with him being a Christian before I was a Buddhist, and him being a pastor before, while I was, still a pagan, heathen, whatever. And then beyond that, a lot of disagreement about what all this meant and how to approach it. I remember when I came home from college one year, so this is going back a ways, and my brother was newly into his Christian path. And I said, so let me get this straight. I'm going to hell and you're not. And he said, yes. And it was very early in his practice. But, in his understanding of Christianity at that point in time, you either accepted Jesus Christ or you didn't. And you would go to hell or not. And I was like, I think my exact words were probably, that is bullshit. How can that be true? We both came from the same parents. We both were raised with the same values. We both value the same kinds of behavior. But that's where he was. And then many, many, many years later, when Doug and I were able to reconnect, and Nick came out, as a young teenager being gay, I did not know how to have that conversation with my brother. But when I had that conversation with my brother, he said, tell Nick that we love him and we will always love him, and no matter what. And I said, well, what about gay? And he said, my job is to introduce people to Jesus, not to tell them how to live. And, I thought that was a pretty big, expansive view coming from, a Southern Christian place, or at least what I thought about it. Right, at least what I thought about it, the stories that I told about it. And Zen and this practice allowed me to get out of those stories, and allowed me to connect with my brother, and allowed me to go into his church and talk to his congregation about, you don't really have to be afraid of me or Buddha, I mean, here's what it can mean. And, and for me, actually, Buddha was a path to understanding what you're saying when you say God. And so anyway, my mother credited, at least on my side, this practice with being part of what brought our family back together. And it gave her great joy to see Debbie and Doug and I back together as brother and sister and brother. And we've largely remained together ever since. I don't think there's been points of stress around which nursing home is she going to go into and which coast and stuff like that. But so, how do you requite that filial piety? How do you make this practice real? How do you make this practice of Buddhism or Christianity real? For Deb and Doug and I, it is to hold that family and to be the love of that family and to take it beyond and to take it to further. When I got the news in San Juan Capistrano, I was in the garden with Lori, but I was on my way up to Yokoji. Zen Mountain Center was my next destination. And got the news, and Lori and I were together with that. And eventually I said, I think I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go on up the mountain. I'm just going to keep going. And Lori said, yeah, you should. I think it's the right thing to do. I've got a lot to do. I need some time with this. Go be with Roshi and the gang up there in that sacred place. I wrote to Tenshin letting him know, and I said, I just got news that my mother died suddenly. Heart just stopped. 82 years old. Nothing for me to do from here yet, so I'm headed your way. And he immediately said, we can do service for her tomorrow. Sorry to hear the news. Are you okay? And I said, yep, I'm good. Shocking, though not surprising. She had some bad years for many years. Now listen to this part, okay? I'm not proud of this part, but listen to this part. Was hard to see someone so caught in and seemingly determined to suffer. A lot of anger with the world. So no more of that anyway. ... And that was a pure feeling. I've had a lot of sadness around what I and Debbie and Doug have seen as what appeared to be just like, I'm going to suffer. That's what we saw when we looked at my mom. I'm going to suffer. Because none of our interventions, none of our various practices, none of our faith, none of our sending books, nothing seemed to have any effect. And it reached the point where it's like, do you want to be this unhappy? And then you start giving up. And you start giving up. And yet over the course of the last 3 days being up there and doing things that needed to be attended to, in the Friday morning service that we performed up there, which was beautiful, I looked back at those words and I said, well, in those words that I wrote, isn't there a judgment in that? Isn't there a story that I've created? I'm looking at her life, I'm looking at her experience of her life, and I'm created a story called She Wants to Be Unhappy. She wants to suffer. And damn it, Mom. And anger around that. And then I reflected a little bit more on, this whole thing, this whole Buddhist thing, the end of suffering, right? How do we end suffering? Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. I vow to liberate them. I vow to help end suffering. And I looked at the text and I thought about the end of suffering, and then I realized that that's all right here. I'm the end of suffering. And I and all of us and my son, it's up to us to take that life that my mother had, that life that my father had, the life that we have, that I have, and stop suffering. Be the end of suffering. Choose to be no suffering. Choose to be that son that my mom made the kindergarten desk for on top of a beanbag, because in New Mexico at the time there was no kindergarten. And so we sat there doing kindergarten on TV, on a desk that she made. And choose to be that son, that sat down on a cushion going, this life's not really making a lot of sense to me. And of course I picked a practice that says, none of it makes any sense, but choose to be that son that took that forward and is doing the best that he can with all of the limitations that I have. Choose to be that son. Choose to be the son that believes in being healthy and physically fit and goes out and runs ultra marathons. Choose to be that smile. My mother was crazy. She used to get down on the floor and giggle and play and make stupid sounds and voices with Nick when he was a little boy. We were just up in Washington State, and I told you about some of my avoidance behaviors called play with the dogs, play with the kids. And, in a way, I'm like being the best of my mom. When I'm out in the yard goofing off with the kids. Bring that to life. There were so many years of that. And she is in me. And so it's really my filial duty to be the end of suffering to the best of my abilities. That's requiting my filial piety, as the words of that ancient koan say. And so, what does that mean for each of us? What does that mean for each of us? What does it mean for Melanie there, And with your mother Sandra there. And vice versa, Sandra, as the mom, right? Like, be that crazy Sandra that you are, Exactly. You just requited your filial piety. We keep it going. Now, like I said, it's a little dangerous to be all wise and throw this shit out there, in the middle of this, because I know that at some point I'll probably be brought to my knees crying. I'm not feeling that right now. After my father passed, I don't know why, but I was at a Dodgers game with some friends and the whole crowd started cheering and I was on the ground bawling. I mean, my dad and I didn't go to a lot of Dodgers games. There's no memory that I remember about being in Dodger Stadium with my dad. And yet it was undeniable and overwhelming. Probably something to do with the connection with everybody else and that harmony with everybody else that happens in a stadium, that happens at a concert, that happens when we listen to music, that happens when we're together on Sundays. So just some ruminations, the end of suffering. How do we end suffering? And in large part, like Laura and Dylan and I were talking about, and I don't want to minimize the pain or suffering that any of us might feel at any point in time, but just like with those thoughts that are running around in our heads, the stories that we're telling about our mothers alive or dead, the stories we're telling about each other across the room or the person in the next car, we have a lot of choice there on what we hang on to and what we let go. What stories we choose to celebrate. And, so I could go on a very long time about just some of the awfulness of the last, I don't know, is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? I mean, and maybe some of these demons were with my mother even when she was building the desk, and even when she was kicking the soccer ball with me or throwing the softball with me. And maybe they were there, and her will to requite her filial piety had her kicking the soccer ball and throwing the softball. It was hardball. You know, when I look back at some of the things in my childhood, I'm like, oh, maybe that's the same thing. And yet, even through all of that, she was a great mom. So who am I to judge the last 2 days or the last 2 weeks or the last 2 months or the last 2 years or the last 2 decades? According to her caretaker, she was painting 6 days ago, and then she dropped dead. I'd like to see what she's painting. I don't know if that's around, Deb, you know? Anyway, I think I'll stop there before I just go whinging on, you know, the son who lost his mother. But I did think that there were perhaps some things that I've seen in the last few days that were worth sharing in terms of our practice, in terms of our ability to tell stories and choose which stories we tell, and just, you know, retouch on the koan we did 2 weeks ago. You know, today I have requited my filial piety. I really feel that way. When I worked with Tenshin Roshi on this koan, he kind of surprised me with that question. He said, "Do you feel that?" I'm like, "What? Do you feel that?" He was testing and probing and wanting to know. Do you understand? Do you feel the filial piety? Do you feel that you are requiting it? Can you be the end of suffering? Can I? It's a worthwhile endeavor, I think. I love you all, and thank you so much for being here. And sorry just to like throw "mom died" at you, but mom died. Got thrown at me too. All right. Questions, comments, observations? Over to you. Gabriel.